What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you for joining. This is episode 25 of Hockey on the Spot. Coming down to the final stretch of the 30 teams in 30 days for the entire month of August. Yesterday, we ended off our Atlantic Division Tour, our new Atlantic Division Tour with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're now down to the final division, 8 teams to go in the Eastern Conference, down to the Metropolitan Division. This is the big one. This is the big one, folks. The new Metropolitan Division, the only division in the league with a new name, and it all begins with the Carolina Hurricanes in what could potentially be the most competitive division in the National Hockey League this year. So let's talk about the Carolina Hurricanes. Last season, great start for the Carolina Hurricanes. 8-4-0. Everything was going their way. They had one of the best lines in the National Hockey League all season long, actually. Their top line of their captain, Eric Staal at center, Alexander Semin on the right wing, and Jiri Tlusty on the left wing. Alexander Semin was so good that he was given a 5-year contract extension. And everything was going great. Cam Ward looked like a goaltender that was in a position where he could have been a finalist for the Vezina Trophy. He was having a Vezina Trophy caliber season. And everything was going right for the Carolina Hurricanes. 8-4-1 was their start. And for a while, they led the now extinct Southeast Division in points. However, all that changed March 3rd, 2013 against the Florida Panthers. Carolina had a 3-0 lead. And then 8 minutes and 56 seconds into the second period, Cam Ward suffers a lower body injury, later diagnosed as a third-degree sprain of the medial collateral ligament on his left knee, which he would not need surgery for. However, recovery time was expected to be about 6 to 8 weeks. He would miss the remainder of the regular season. The Carolina Hurricanes would hold on to win that game by a final score of 3-2, but unfortunately, everything went downhill from there. And it wasn't just Cam Ward. They had injuries all over the place. Their top defenseman, Joni Pitkanen, he got hurt, missed a while during the season. Their backup goaltender from last season, Dan Ellis, he missed a little bit of time. Justin Falk got hurt at a point in the season. He missed some time. Tuomo Ruutu was out most of the year with an injury. And then at the World's Tour, and then in the World Championships this year, to make matters worse, to add insult to injury, Eric Staal suffers a knee-on-knee hit with defenseman Alexander Edler, and he ends up missing the rest of the World's tournament, and he has spent the offseason recovering from injury. So it feels like nothing could get worse for the Carolina Hurricanes, but unfortunately, once Cam Ward got hurt, in a way, their season pretty much ended that night. For the rest of the season, with Dan Ellis as the starter, they went 7-17-3. A very miserable record. They were forced to call up Justin Peters. He even had to start at one point, but they did not have valuable goaltending depth behind Cam Ward. Dan Ellis is way past the point in his career where he was a good enough to be a starter. He used to be good enough to be a starter. Now, at this point in his career, he is not, but he is no longer a member of the Carolina Hurricanes. He went and signed this offseason with the Dallas Stars to be the backup behind Kari Lehtonen. So, with all these injuries and stuff, there definitely was change that was due for Carolina. Because of how poorly they finished, they ended up finishing 26th in the league, 13th in the Eastern Conference with a record of 19-25-4, 42 points, tied in points with the Calgary Flames. However, the Flames ended up getting a spot ahead because they just barely had a better ROW at the end of the season. So, it's that for the Carolina Hurricanes, a lot of negativity going into going into the end of the season or the second half after such a great start. And that this team would have been a playoff team. They definitely would have been a playoff team had it not been for those injuries, particularly the one to Cam Ward, a guy who was absolutely having a Vezina Trophy caliber season. But of course, when you do finish as low as that, you do get rewarded. The Carolina Hurricanes were rewarded with the 5th overall pick in this year's draft, which they used to select Swedish center / right winger Elias Lindholm out of Brynäs in the Swedish league. A kid who figures to maybe start the year as a third-line center, but could work his way up possibly as a second-line winger. But this is a kid who they have very high hopes for. They signed him to an entry-level deal, and he's going to be an excellent addition for this team. Outside of that and the Alexander Semin contract extension, it's been a relatively inactive offseason for the Carolina Hurricanes, but they did lose a bunch of guys like defenseman Marc-Andre Bergeron, an offensive defenseman, with a kid like Ryan Murphy coming up who figures to basically take his place. He was allowed to go to the KHL. And then the other big questionable loss is the loss of right winger Chad LaRose, who the Hurricanes did want to re-sign. They really did want to sign him, but he did not get in contact with them. And as far as we know now, it seems as though he's announced his retirement from the National Hockey League unofficially. So we're not sure if that's the case. Who knows? Maybe he signs with the Hurricanes late in the season. Maybe he signs somewhere else. We don't know what's going to happen. But that was just the beginning of their losses. They lost Joe Corvo. He signed with the Ottawa Senators, his second stint up there. Marc-Andre Gragnani, who never really fit into their system, a guy who's always been a good defenseman, but never really fit in Carolina. He has yet to sign with a team, but he's not going back to Carolina. Bobby Sanguinetti, he played a big role, had a huge promotion step forward last year, 37 games, the most of his NHL career. So he played most of the season, but he is also still on the board, but he will not be back in Carolina. And then Tim Wallace, also who saw a little bit of time, he's still on the board. He will not be back. But then, of course, you talk about some of the guys who left and did go elsewhere. Jerome Sampson, who was always one of their top American Hockey League players, a guy who they called up quite constantly when they had injuries. Jerome Sampson, he leaves. He goes over to sign with the Winnipeg Jets. And then goaltender Dan Ellis, as I said before, has gone to sign with the Dallas Stars. And then quite a few losses for the Hurricanes this year. However, they did have some additions as well. Nothing major, but just some minor moves. They got defenseman Mike Komisarek coming over from the Toronto Maple Leafs. He only played 4 games last year. The Leafs used one of their 2 compliance buyouts to buy out Mike Komisarek. The Leafs signed him to a 1-year deal. He will get a full-time role in Carolina, that is for sure. At one point considered to be one of the best shutdown defensemen in the game, but now gets a second chance in Carolina, going to a city that doesn't have as high of expectations. They also get for center Nathan Gerbe, who was bought out by the Buffalo Sabres. They signed him to a 1-year, 2-way contract. He figures to add some depth. The smallest player in the National Hockey League. Probably will sit as a possible 13th forward. Could squeeze in as the 12th guy. You don't know. They got Aaron Palushai coming over from the Colorado Avalanche. He'll add some depth to the team. Played on the Avs' 4th line last year and had a solid year for them, despite a rough year in general for the Colorado Avalanche. But he's now with the Carolina Hurricanes. They get Matthew Corrente from the New Jersey Devils, their former first-round pick from 2006, 30th overall. Never really played the role in New Jersey like they thought he would. maybe one day he could have that happen to him in Carolina, but as far as it goes now, more of a move for the Charlotte Checkers, but a good one. And then the Carolina Hurricanes also made a trade this offseason, trading away a player who had been expected to be traded for a while. Defenseman Jamie McBain was dealt to the Buffalo Sabres as well as a draft pick. But in exchange, the Carolina Hurricanes acquired defenseman Andrej Sekera from the Buffalo Sabres, a guy who will be a top 4 defenseman for the Hurricanes. A former highly sought-after defenseman, a shutdown defenseman, was very valuable in Buffalo, and he'll be even more valuable in Carolina, considering they don't have as high of expectations, despite the fact that they have a Stanley Cup and Buffalo doesn't. But the expectations won't be as high, and Andrej Sekera, like Mike Komisarek, Andrej Sekera can definitely thrive through that. And then the biggest signing for the Carolina Hurricanes this year, their biggest move, came in the form of a signing. And believe it or not, it came in the signing of a backup goaltender, very interestingly enough, bringing in goaltender Anton Khudobin, coming over from the Boston Bruins, signing him to a contract. Normally, you don't look at backup goaltender signings too much. You don't look at them as much of anything. However, given the situation, this is a very good signing of a backup goaltender for the Carolina Hurricanes. In fact, Anton Khudobin was the number 4 unrestricted free agent among goaltenders this past offseason. He was one of the top goaltenders sought out. And this is a guy who, in my opinion, he did play very solid in Boston, backing up Tuukka Rask. He could do just the same backing up Cam Ward. And unlike Dan Ellis, this is a guy who could fill in the starting role if Cam Ward does suffer another injury. So now they're in a position where even if Cam Ward gets hurt, they'll still be solid in net because Khudobin figures to be a guy who could eventually be a starting goaltender for a team somewhere. Even if it is Carolina and they one day trade Cam Ward, you never know what could happen in the league. So, it's a great situation for the Carolina Hurricanes to be in right now. And even though it's a backup goaltender, that actually is Carolina's biggest signing this offseason, and it is a big one. So, a great signing by the Carolina Hurricanes. So, yeah, not too many additions this offseason, and a lot of room for young talent. And honestly, and Elias Lindholm will figure to be one of them. So will Ryan Murphy. Their forwards, as far as their forwards go, they're all set. Again, their top line will be back. Eric Staal, who is ahead of schedule, by the way. He was supposed to miss the beginning of the season, but he's ahead of schedule, which means he could possibly be there opening night. Alexander Semin is there. He was another guy that got hurt, but he got hurt only when the season was basically over. He missed the last 2 games of the year, but he should be fine and ready for camp. Jiri Tlusty, he'll be there. Jordan Staal, Elias Lindholm could play on that line. Jeff Skinner, Tomo Ruutu, Riley Nash. Riley Nash will see a full-time role this year as their third-line center, possibly. Patrick Dwyer will be there. And then they have a young fourth line of guys that haven't seen much NHL action, but could be ready for that type of position this season. Jeremy Welsh, Zach Dalpe, and Drayson Bowman. Guys who haven't seen too much NHL time. Zach Dalpe has seen the most of any of them, but they'll be ready to see some time this season. And then again, Nathan Gerbe is a guy who could actually battle out one of them, possibly. And then Kevin Westgarth, who saw quite a significant amount of playing time last year, but probably will not see as much this year. So they're all set at forward. I like their forward depth, and scoring is not a problem for them, even though they did have the 27th best power play in the league, the 4th worst power play in the league. It's defensively where they have problems. They will be doing their best to work on their power play for this season for sure, but it's their defense that has some questions on it. Justin Falk and Joni Pitkanen both coming back from injuries. Yoni Pitkinen, he has not been healthy a full day in like 2 seasons. So this is a guy who basically they need to stay healthy. Justin Falk, he'll stay hopefully be healthy. They also got Tim Gleason and Andre Sekera in that top 4. Jay Harrison, Mike Komisarek, a very solid bottom pair. And then Brent Belmore figures to be the 7th guy. Ryan Murphy is a guy who could also battle out one of those guys. And then in goal, Cam Ward and Anton Khudobin. So to me, their forwards are fine, and their goaltending, I think, will be just fine. It's the defense that'll be the big question for this team. Their penalty kill, their penalty kill was 28th overall in the league last year. Power play, again, not much better, 27th overall. So odd man situations will be a thing to work on this offseason for head coach Kirk Muller. Which kind of leads us to one of the bigger questions this year. Can Cam Ward stay healthy? Can everybody on this team stay healthy? And in a new division with new opponents, will they be able to thrive as good? They'll still be having daily trips to visit the Washington Capitals, and luckily they won't have to see the Winnipeg Jets as much anymore. So that'll make things a little easier, but they won't be seeing Florida or Tampa Bay anymore. Now they're in a division where they'll have to make daily trips to Columbus, to a growing Columbus Blue Jackets team, but also trips to both Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York. So that won't be easy. That's never easy to visit those areas, especially with a Pittsburgh Penguins team that includes Sidney Crosby. So it definitely is going to be a challenging year for the Carolina Hurricanes for sure. That's definitely one of the big questions revolving around them this season. Also, can Elias Lindholm be the player they hope he's going to be? That'll be the big question. And can Jeff Skinner step up and be the player he was in his rookie season? That remains to be seen. And can Mike Komisarek have a rebound year? Those are the big questions for me. And if Cam Ward does get hurt, will Anton Khudobin be able to step in? I think he will. I think he's much better than Dan Ellis. I think he will be just fine. Now, taking a look at Carolina's top prospects. Excellent in the top 4. Elias Lindholm, Ryan Murphy, Victor Rask, and Brock McGinn. An excellent top 4. But beyond that, you don't really know too much of these guys. Brody Sutter's familiar. Son of Dwayne Sutter. Keegan Lowe, the son of Kevin Lowe. So they have a few guys. A goaltender on there, Colin Olsen. But the one guy on this list that always caught my eye, not a very deep prospect pool, an okay one, not a great one, not the worst I've seen, but the one that has always caught my eye is the number 2 prospect defenseman Ryan Murphy. At one point, this was a guy who I thought could have been the top pick defenseman, but he was not. And though he's the best offensive defenseman in the draft, defensively, he's not there. He was the 12th overall pick in the 2011 NHL entry draft, and he was an offensive dynamo for the Kitchener Rangers. Played 4 games last year, didn't have a point, but showed great strides. So was called up because of injuries. So honestly, because of how great he is offensively, even though he's very small, 5'11", 185 pounds, I think he's going to be a spectacular power play quarterback for years to come. Defensively, he'll need work, but I think offensively, he's going to be a star. Now, the player on this team that needs to be good in order for the Hurricanes to be a playoff team this year, no doubt about it, has to be defenseman Yoni Pitkinen. Pitkinen has not been healthy a full day for a couple seasons, so if they're going to be a playoff team, he has to be healthy, and he needs to be good when healthy. Overall, are the Carolina Hurricanes a playoff team? Honestly, I think if they can stay healthy, I actually do think they can be a playoff team. I think they can beat out a team like the Detroit Red Wings or the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs. I definitely think they all have the potential. So I will say yes. I think they will make the playoffs this year. Okay, guys, that'll do for episode 25 of Hockey on the Spot. Join me again tomorrow when we talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld, and join in again tomorrow. Have a great day.